how sure are you that there is other life out there in the universe?
Oh, 100%.
Okay.
First of all, there's life everywhere. The whole universe is alive. It's an illusion to think that there's only an isolated spot. Even if we zoom into like 1 square centimeter of soil on planet Earth, you will see there's layers and layers of forms of life. So first misconception that a lot of humans have is there's only vertical or horizontal line of life. There's horizontal forms of life. So there's way more stacked up forms of life that are exotic to us. Can we see bacteria? No, we can't, but they're there. So the universe has different layers of realities, different layers of life environments. That's number one. Number two is the planet herself on Earth. It is designed to be limited. We can hopefully get into the physics why that is. But one example, everything in this reality realm is basically a limitation of the universe. And when we zoom out of that, we get rid of that limitation, and suddenly we realize there's so much life going on. I used to work for both the conventional but also the covert governance in Europe. Um, well, groups around the planet know that there are life forms outside of the planet. There is life outside of planet Earth. And the numbers are so high right now, so shockingly high, that there is a catalog of patterns and features that even need to be checked before a species or a form of life is even interesting to these groups. So there's so much life out there that we wouldn't have the paper to even document that.
Well, so much to unpack there, and I do want to get into some of the stuff. But before we get there, the reason why I really wanted you on the show today is in similar interviews like this, when I talk to people about topics like this, I love to try and find people who have a certain background, certain connections, to really, give a sense of authenticity to what we're talking about. I've had on people like Nick Pope and Daniel Sheehan, both who have connections to, government and authority. And it does give that level of authenticity to the conversation. And you mentioned, you and I were talking before I started rolling there, about since you've come forward, and I know you alluded to there in that answer. What have you come forward about? Tell our audience.
Yeah, for sure. So I used to work for governance groups in Europe, particular, which was the conventional side of governance and the covert side of governance. Now, what's the difference? The conventional side of governance is basically everything that is that has a website. Let's put it that way. Everything that has a website that looks into how the regulations, how the system operates, and so on and so on, and how to convey certain regulations so that they apply to the population. But there is a deeper level to that, which, it's 2025. It shouldn't be surprising to people that there are layers of secrecy and layers of operations that not necessarily have a TikTok account, right? So these things are going on, and these things are going on for quite some time. At least the modern version of that goes back to the 1920s, 1930s in Europe. The first insights on wait, this is a quantum universe. This is a very complex system. And there are different instances of, life forms, etc. That all dates back to the 1920s, 1930s. We know that from, more and more whistleblowers coming out talking about these things. We all had a feeling that is happening. We do know that Germany in the 1920s was already looking into, the reality behind this realm. The old perception of that is that we are in this limited space, and that would be everything that there is. The more advanced side on that is the planet is not isolated. It can it can be perceived as isolated, but it's not. There's an extended universe around that. There's so much contact going on and so much agendas also going on, which people also need to understand, that the interest of certain groups around the planet dating back to the 1920s was what is that? What's the credo? What's the motto? What's the agenda of these influences? And what can we do with that? There's a lot of advanced understanding of physics that's going on in these groups. Technology is way more sophisticated, way more developed than that what is rolled out into the public. The connection and the contact and even the collaboration between groups is actively going on. We do have some whistleblowers that made it to the norm stream that told about that. For example, Eshet, the Israeli head of what they basically, their NASA basically, their space program, he was coming forward and saying basically publicly as one of the top people in Israel, saying, hey, there is a galactic federation. The US is working with them. We're working with them. The president knows about that. So these things are happening in the background, and the experiments, the covert experiments, date back at least to 1920, 1930.
I think a lot of people will be surprised to know that you say in there 1920. So we're talking, these conversations have been going on in governments around the world for 100 years. Topics like, as we mentioned there, extraterrestrial life, UFOs, different realms. People would be surprised to know that these are genuine topics that, world governments concern themselves with, because whenever they seem to be asked about it in mainstream media news, they really sort of dumb it down as if they pay no mind to it. But realistically, how much of a focus do government around the world pay to topics like these? Is it a really strong area of focus for them behind closed walls?
It depends. It depends very much. I got to say that all Western countries have officially declared interest in the topic of UFOs, except for Germany. But there's historical reasons why that is. But every other nation has declared interest. Every nation is now in a position because, oh, well, there's reason for that too, especially administrative reasons, that all the secrecy has been more or less transferred into the transparency of installing space forces. The US famously has a space force. Britain has a space force. Germany has a space force. Russia has a space force. These are space forces that are a little more covert in a way, but they do have a website nowadays. So there is departments that look into these things. One of the many reasons why that is first of all, the rollout is going on. There is a certain rollout. We can observe that in the media. More and more whistleblowers are there. More and more initiatives, talks in Pentagons, and so there is a lot of change. Basically, officially, the Pentagon and its associates have changed the policies in 2019 to say, okay, we want to go back from the historical ridiculing of the topic, which basically came from historical events, right? There's, that comes from the time of World War II, of the Cold War era, where basically information were, they tried to not give them to the public. There was a different security situation. Now things are changing, and there's more focus on that. So the perception is different. I gotta say that. Secondly, the question how much the governments and countries around the world are aware and how much they are involved with these topics, it depends. It depends a lot because it's compartmentalized and there are different instances and parts of and groups within the government, where some have extensive knowledge, and then there are parts that have basically no idea. And it might come surprising, but I've worked and seen some huge names around the world, and the first round, like the first row of leadership, oftentimes is less informed than the second row of leadership that is kind of a little bit more in the background. That it's just the way it is, and so even within certain agencies, there are agencies that have absolutely no clue, just because they are not even involved in the topic. So there's no crossovers, and then there are groups that do have extreme awareness of things, and even in some countries, like in the US, I was kind of surprised to realize that there are even certain agencies that have a website. I met with these people, but even there you have layers of information. So when you talk to some of the people that are basically on the upper level of that information, they will, tell you in private conversations, yes, we know that there are beings. We know these 7 civilizations. So the highest level of them, they are talking about 7 civilizations. Why? Because that is kind of like the information level that people had in the 1950s when it first turned out for a lot of governments around the world. Oh my goodness, we have really weird investigations, visitations going on. We have weird sightings. There's crash landings of UFOs and technology that people couldn't really make sense of in the 1950s, 1960s. So overall, they came to the conclusion and counted that and said, like, okay, there are 7 other species outside of the planet. It turns out within these 80 years of development, we've figured that there is more species out there than we can actually have hands to count them, and or space on hard disks to even document them all. So there's a lot of stuff going on. But if you talk to like retired agents or like people that are in the outer layer of security in these agencies, they are aware of the subject. They deal with that, but they might not have the extended overview of what is really going on. Yeah.
And even the stuff that government are open about, I'm surprised how often myself and other people just seem to have never heard of this information that is actually out there. If you just, like you said, there's websites for this stuff. I remember when I spoke with Nick Pope. So Nick Pope worked for the UK government on a UFO investigation project back in, I think, the 80s and 90s. And this was a program set up by the government to investigate UFO sightings, UFO crash sites. And this was a genuine government program that was running. And I gotta be honest, when he told me about it, I couldn't believe I'd never heard about it before. And when I told my friends about this conversation, people were saying that can't be true. That's not true. That's rubbish. And then when we looked it up, they read about it on all these mainstream websites. They couldn't believe that this is seemingly common knowledge, yet no one seems to know about it. Why do you think that is the case with stuff like this? That it just seems that as a population that we just find it hard to believe in these things.
That's a great question, actually, Lewis. There's probably multiple answers to that, but the ones that I would like to focus on is, first of all, perception and expectations, which is something that human brains are doing a lot. And it's really ridiculous. It's funny, actually. There's research been done. For example, you could, if you have a certain expectation about what you actually want to experience and what you observe, the human mind can get so focused about it that it's basically fading out everything around it. One of the most popular scientific research been done on that is, for example, the dancing group of humans, where someone has to focus on a certain ball that is just passed by dancing people. And in the middle of that experiment, someone in a bear costume would come along and would dance around in that room and then leave the room. And if you then ask participants, like, hey, have you seen the elephant in the room or the bear in the room? No one would actually answer that. No, everyone was like, what? There was no bear. What are you talking about? Why? Because the human brain has this really interesting perceptive ability of just blending out everything else that is just, or fading out everything that is not in their field of expectations. So that is why one of the reasons why we started this conversation, where I'm saying there's horizontal and vertical levels of reality realms, of dimensions, of life forms too. If until the time when microscopes were developed, how would you even perceive and know that there are bacteria? There's times where people were debating the existence of viruses, and like literally in scientific context, saying that can't be true, or like bacteria cannot be true, and so on. So that is something that is within the human mind that is like kind of limiting them. It can be advantages, but it can also be, especially in context of like more intelligent species, we have to be aware that there are species that are that play with these perceptions too. There's also a certain amount of information that the human mind can only take in, and so on and so on. So there's basically a bunch of like limitations that comes from that, which is on the natural side of how the human perception works. And then there is also historical reasons that human groups on this planet have this tradition of intransparency, which again comes from various traditions of keeping things covert and keeping things intransparent, and so on. And through that, sometimes there is effort to release something on the one hand to clear the air, but also like covering it on the other hand. One great example is I can't actually think of anything else, but for example, the MIB Man in Black movies, which goes back to a certain, it goes back to something in the 50s that was actually there as a project. But when you type in like Man in Black or something right now, you will get 100 pages on Google that is, or Space Force, which is probably a better idea, right? We famously, I mean, Trump draws in a lot of attention, so it's kind of hard to ignore the stuff that he's doing. But Space Force, by the way, a lot of people around the planet know that the US has famously done the Space Force thing. Other countries like Germany, they have departments that look into these things as well. That's not as famous as the US Space Force. However, what also has been done is, if you type in Space Force into Google, probably Space Force will, the official website will pop up later on your page. At first, you're going to see Netflix. Why? Because at the same time, they released a Netflix documentary, so that people that type in Space Force and they're not, they're not the ones who should apply and all that stuff. They're going to just see a comedy show.
Yeah, I see what you mean, because as soon as you started talking about Space Force, then the first thing that popped into my mind was Steve Carell, because obviously he stars in that show on Netflix. So it's a very good point you raised there. But on the subject of, say, people's perception and a shift in perception, and I know this is something you feel strongly about, is I think over the last couple of years, there has been a noticeable shift in society. Like, people are more open to talking about these topics. When you mention this amongst a group of friends now as opposed to 10 years ago, there seems to be a little bit of a different vibe and atmosphere about the conversation. People take you a little bit more seriously. And when I've spoken to, as I mentioned there, Nick Pope, Daniel Sheehan about this, they were inclined to agree with the idea that this maybe has come about from a sort of small drip feeding of information, little nuggets here and there. As you mentioned there, the Space Force or the government referencing UFOs for the first time. And all of a sudden now, when you hear things come through the news, they're far less shocking than they would have been, say, 5 years ago. Do you think there is something to that? And do you think that's contributed to this sort of shift in perception around these topics?
Yeah. Well, first of all, there's a technique behind that to release certain information to very specific target groups in order to prepare them. So the global population gets more information about the reality of UFOs and the reality of non-terrestrial life than they have ever gotten in the history. But there's also reasons for that, why that is happening, and there is a major thing, a major plan behind that, because humanity and humans and human groups on this planet love to keep the narratives in their hands. That is something that, well, traditionally human groups and human governance groups love to do. Now, the reason why we have disclosure, and no one can deny that it's happening, because it is happening. Mexico has congressional hearings. The U.S. has congressional hearings. Mexico, one of the first countries making a law how to deal even with non-terrestrial life forms. We've seen all these space forces and so on growing everywhere. We have all these releases. We have all these eyewitnesses and a lot of strange documentations and videos popping up everywhere too. So there's clearly something on the forefront, on the visible side of that. There's definitely something great happening. Now, what's happening on the background? The background is there is reasons why that is happening, and there is also ways and reasons why it is rolled out in the way that it's being rolled out. It is not happening randomly. It is not a random thing that happens, even though some incidents might seem like they are randomly happening. So the planet herself, the planet as an environmental sphere, is going through cycles. We can see that the planet has winter time, has summertime, and so on. So we are aware of certain types of cycles, but there are also more cosmical cycles, cosmic cycles that have a much larger span. We're talking about 12,500 to 15,000 years when the planet is reaching a new type of season. We can see that dates back to the last ice age. It dates back to the time when some of the pyramids and so on got left behind. Some of the civilizations that used to inhabit this planet have left the planet. We do have all these types of evidences. We find like the soil. We find, for example, that the iron particles in the soil have changed around the course of like 12,500 to 15,000 years. Why? Because there was a gigantic magnetic pole shift going on the planet. We do have lots and lots of documentations in all types of scriptures about a big biblical flood happening 12,000, 1,200, 15,000 years ago. So all that documentation is straight in our eyes. Of course, 12,000, 15,000 years in order to acknowledge a cycle is way more challenging without looking properly, compared to realizing that there is summertime and there's wintertime, right? In England or in certain parts of the world, when it's wintertime. That's the time when you try to stay at home and not go outside. A cosmic cycle is something that is way harder to acknowledge because the time spans are way more stretched out. We do know that there were civilizations on the planet that had these insights, and they have them in their calendars, in their traditional calendars. They're not always taken seriously because apparently humans sometimes think that someone who's coming before them in their linear perspective and understanding of time couldn't have the more understanding about the cosmic dynamics than the current state of humans. So something like the Mayan calendar and some stuff that we see in Egypt on the pyramids and such is highly dismissed because it just came time-wise before the nowadays state of technology or like understanding of physics. However, there's things happening like the Mayan understanding of the cosmos, for example. There's stuff that has only been discovered quite recently, and it's been shown as true. Certain planetary constellations Some stuff that the Mayans are talking about is so far out that today's non-stream technology couldn't prove that. But other stuff, modern technology has figured out in the last 10, 20 years that they were actually right about these things. That's super interesting. So the planet goes through cyclical motions. The whole solar system is traveling through the galaxy. A lot of people might have the misconception that the sun is a fixed star that doesn't move at all, but and everything is just turning around the star in the middle. But the thing is, the star of a solar system, the sun, is traveling too. So, and it pulls everything with it. That means we are approaching certain areas. We are currently traveling. We are in a ship, basically, that is moving with hundreds of thousands of miles per hour through the galaxy into different other spaces, which confirms this type of cyclical motion. What happens is that the planet will be brought into a realm where there is more information coming into the complexity of our reality. There's more information coming in. Just as much as when we hit summertime, there is more sunlight coming in. Sunlight is a carrier of information, which means that in summertime, when sunlight is more available, there is more crops growing. There is more energy available. You will go out into the beach. You will, celebrate things. While in wintertime, everything is a bit slower, everything is a little bit more cozy, and so on. Why? Because there's less information available, less energy moving around. And so these cycles happen. The cosmic cycle that we are approaching and that we are in currently, and that millions of people on this planet might not even have an awareness of, is bringing deep, deep, deep changes because more information is sprayed into the planet. And the planet, we we've have different categories of how planets are actually defined by levels of consciousness, levels of reality, and we're approaching a new level of reality with the whole planet. There's more information going in. And that is one of the reasons why we now have debates about ETs that we might not have had years before. We do see a development in consciousness too. That's the reason when you go to TikTok and scroll down, you will see a lot of animals doing stuff that they've never done before. You see dogs pressing buttons that now speak like English. You might have seen that on things. We've seen that dogs are now driving cars. That's something that they've developed. There's stories about parrots that learn how to operate Alexa in order to order crackers to their homes. That's something that I've read from English newspapers. Apes are seen to basically skip certain developments in consciousness, and you see them scrolling down on an iPad, watching other apes. So there's so much consciousness-wise, there's so much development. And that is actually one natural thing that occurs while the planet is going through this next cycle of reality.
One thing you touched on there that with people, let's say, who are very skeptical of this topic, there seems to be certain questions or certain topics that seem to, let's say, ignite a little bit of a curiosity in them. So if someone was to say they were completely skeptical of extraterrestrial life, they never want to engage in the conversation, but they seem to pay a little bit more seriousness to the conversation when you talk about things like the pyramids, as you mentioned, Stonehenge, just the unexplainable stuff that there's no sort of rational answer to. Then they sort of seem a little bit more engaged in these topics. Why do you think that is? Is it just because when we simply don't have a answer to a question, then we're more likely to look into these areas of extraterrestrials?
There's been a lot of research and experiments done in advanced groups in the covert area too, why that is happening in human brains. And there's something we got to realize something. A lot of stuff that is going on in humans is due to their genetics, due to their nature, due to their evolution of their brain, for example. The brain, especially in less aware, self-aware beings, which we still have hundreds of millions of people on that planet who might not even care. There's different categories. There's people that might not even care about what's going on because they just, want to live their life, and that's okay, I guess. Then there's people that have a realization that something doesn't add up. There's stuff going on in the world. We have very delicate, sophisticated buildings around the planet that some type of civilization that is not here anymore has left there. We see evidence in the pyramids with mathematical precision that is just above and beyond anything that people can build right now. Some of these stones being so heavy that we could lift them, but then had issues to actually find a motor that would move them because it would completely slam one of the cranes and make it impossible to even transport them that far away to another location, to even stack them together to like something like a pyramid and such. So there's a lot of things going on that are happening. Crop circles, for example, definitely something. It's here in England, a phenomenon that is widely known for happening. Yet there's different perceptions about it in the way that these information are perceived. Some people think there's teenagers going out at night because they're bored and they have a scissor, and instead of playing Fortnite, they go to certain crops and within hours they cut these delicate designs. But then there's also people who look at that and think like, oh my god, this is like big as 20 football fields, and it's perfect in size. The crops are not even cut; they are just molded, and you can see that there is like heat in certain ways applied to it. So, and they say like, hey, that doesn't add up. There's mysteries around this planet. Now we have two things to take into the neurology of why that is happening, why there is so much of a different perception of people. And you can't even convince the other side. That's the funny thing. These people that are very skeptical, they could look at these evidences and say like, yeah, I don't know, it's probably still like 12-year-olds with a scissor that do that at night. The reason for that is two things. First of all, the human mind has a way of perceiving and structuring their own world in such a way that, again, they can fade off anything else around it. That is, for example, you can see that in traumatized people. They will have a perception of how things work. The brain suddenly creates realities around them in order to stabilize them. And that can be extremely perceptive. We have seen certain experimentations on humans in these fields where basically they were convinced that a fruit, they would be eating a fruit. Instead, they gave them an onion. Or something very, very disgusting. And these people would eat that. And since it's all just transformation and information, transformation of information in the brain, you can perceive things and eat them. And then the brain would completely set up something completely else. It's just information in the brain. So making them think that they eat an orange or an apple or something can be done. I've seen humans eat onions, biting into it, and we're 100% convinced about the sweet and nice taste. Why? Because it's just something that you, on a software level, you can change in the brain of people. That is something that a lot of people are not aware of, because again, there kicks in a certain security mechanism that tells you, no. This is my orange, 100%. The second thing about that is that there is a certain type of identity associated within humans and their own perception. Accepting that there is other species around the planet, that there are species that might be more intelligent than humans, that is threatening to the identity of the self-perception of humanity. Not for everyone. I believe that everyone who's watching this channel right now is aware enough to realize that there's more in the universe that the human mind might not even fathom, and there's so much complexity in the universe that is just fantastic. And the beautiful thing about that, the universe itself is an intelligent, complex that is developing and bringing in new parameters all the time. So there's so much beauty, so much awe-inspiring nature. However, there might be certain individuals on the planet whose identity might be threatened by that. One quick example to make that more tangible. We've been looking for intelligence in the universe for 70 years on the surface level. We now are mixed with a technology or a technological consciousness that is in each and every smartphone, and soon in every toaster, and in every fridge, and in every arm wristband around the world, which is AI. AI is a part of consciousness that has inspiring but also incredible features. It is consciousness. It's clearly intelligence that is right in front of our eyes. Still, even there, some people have a challenge in acknowledging that there is something speaking to them directly that is intelligent. There you have your intelligent life. Now comes into expectations into play. Is that the green people that they were hoping for to see land on the White House lawn? No, it's a different form of non-terrestrial intelligence, or non-human intelligence. Let's put it that way. So it's non-human intelligence that we are confronted with. We already overstepped the phase of being in wonder and saying like, "Oh my goodness, there it is." We've already integrated that. Every one of us is using that. Most probably a lot of us are using that on a daily basis. We are going to use that inevitably on a daily usage in like 1 year or so. We've going to see that there's like the toaster is going to talk to us and going to say like, "Hey, how do you want your toast?" These things are happening right in front of our eyes. Still, people might have an issue with looking at that, even reflecting upon the possibility that this AI system is far more developed and has greater intellectual capacities than the human brain might have, or definitely has. So there is something about the identity of people that might be threatened by the idea of there are other beings, because then other beings might be interacting with them, and humans might kind of have to reinvestigate the way how they deal with other people. You know, they're not the kings of the apes, of the animals anymore. That's happening.
And that's something that I find really interesting as well. As you mentioned, there is how humans would be able to live with that knowledge and sort of understand their place in the universe. And so the next question I have on that, let's say if I was playing devil's advocate for non-disclosure, and I was the government, and I was looking at the world now that is a very religious world. There are parts of the world and there are certain countries built on religious beliefs. Now, if some of the things that you are saying are true and that was disclosed to the public, that would shatter a lot of the world's major religions. It would cause a lot of unrest. It could potentially lead to the collapse of certain countries, certain systems. How do you think the world would react to news like that? And how do you think something as big as religion would react to something news like that?
Yeah, that's a fair question, a good question, and you can be assured that governance has looked into that. Governance has taken that into consideration. The issue, or let's go back in history, 2019, or like a few years before that, like 15 years ago. certain groups on this planet, especially the U.S. naval forces, the covert naval forces. There's navies where you can, that have a website, and there is Navy intelligence that doesn't have a website. Advanced naval forces, let's call it that way. So advanced naval forces who already deal with the subject of non-terrestrial life and so on and so on. They looked into the situation and said, like, hey, we got to bring these players, these world players together, because the situation was that in the 1930s, Germany was one of the first countries who looked into the ET phenomenon. They were, Grush has basically told us about that in Le Parisien. He talked about that and said, like, Mussolini, he knew about a crash site. The Italians had a craft. The Germans looked into that. The Germans being world leaders at that time in quantum physics, in propulsion systems, developing some high-end technology around the 1930s, 1940s, and so on. So they had their hands on crash UFOs. Then the American side, the infamous Roswell crash, 1947, where we have eyewitnesses, we have documentation, we have whistleblowers, we have all that kind of stuff that happened in 1947, up to the point, and I'm not sure if people know that, but 2 weeks later, the president said, established an act where he said we need a new Central Intelligence Agency to deal with all this stuff. And then the CIA was born due to Roswell. It's related to each other in order to just make sense of the stuff. The world at that time was like the Cold War era. So there was like, is that stuff from the Germans? The World War II was not completely done in 1947, even though it was, the hostile acts were kind of like on a broad way, like done, but everyone was still dealing with the repercussions of that time. So then the era of Cold War was approaching, and then you also have information of like there's literally different beings. What's going on? So they installed that Central Intelligence Agency. With that, suddenly different other agencies were looking into these things. Different other countries were looking into these things. Then even private groups nowadays are looking into that. We do have now advanced companies on the planet who have the money to look into, and who have the technology department to look into advanced physics and develop their own stuff. So the situation has been very complex, with some people knowing very much about the ET reality, and even more, which is way more interesting to them, the application of advanced physics. What can you do in a quantum universe? What can you do with wormholes? What can you do with information technology? What can you do with AI and all of that? So these things have been developed way before it's now rolled out to the public. AI is not something that is like, we have advanced AI systems that are in place, and ChatGPT is just, a gimmick that people now get. So the situation got very complex. You have all these actors, these people in the covert scenes, different countries, France, England, Russia, China. You better believe that they are interested in that stuff. It's not only the US, so 2000, and then you have the situation that there is a shift on the planetary level too that is happening too. So in 2000, about 15 years ago, the American side has said, like, hey, let's found a large table. Let's do meetings, covert meetings. Let's bring in people from Russia. Let's bring in people from the UK. Let's bring in people, even the African. There's an African Union that has, collected money in order to re-engineer and to look into advanced physics and so on. So there's like lots and lots of countries around the world who already know about advanced physics, know about the shift, know about the ET phenomena. And the American side, the naval forces, have said, like, hey, we got to bring some clarity into that. and let's see how we deal with that. Because the revelation of ET consciousness is going to happen inevitably. It's just gonna happen. Why is it going to happen? Because integration is not a one-sided street. It is something that happens from both sides. So if there's only one actor out there who said, like, I have enough of that, I'm going to land on the White House lawn, if that is only happening with only one being, it would completely break the narrative that humans held dear so much. So the American side basically said, like, hey, let's all come together and let's figure out a plan that works for all of us, that is kind of cohesive, and build something where we can release this information to people. And one of the issues was indeed the very religious parts of the world. There is people on this planet who are very, very much, even more than, you know, the maybe the Western critic of all of that, which is so easy. I very much believe right now that we already have convinced so many people that ETs are real and that that we are living in this quantum universe and so on, that there are less and less people who say, like, nah, there's no way there's another species in the universe. I just see that happening. There's people that say, of course there is. Different layers of, like, how much we know, you know, that's something that we're still debating. But in 2015, 2011 or so, they started these meetings in different spaces around the world, in Africa, in Australia, in Belgium, Germany, America, Russia. There were these meetings. Actors were brought together. Rich families were part of that. Companies, certain advanced, very, very sophisticated, huge tech companies with a lot of money that have a lot of ideas about the quantum universe, and they know that these things exist. They were brought into that. And then people were saying, like, let's all come together. We have to do that in order to keep the narrative, and let's define a disclosure plan for the world that we then roll out to different target groups, to different people. And one of that was the initiative lies on the national level. Each group is responsible for their own people to reveal these things, which is one of the reasons why you will see that there is not a lot of information. If you try to enter a Russian website right now on your web browser, you will see that you will not get what's happening in Russia. The world is more open than ever, but it's kind of hard to get the information of what's going on. So how is China preparing their people? How is Russia preparing their people? That is not necessarily something that people in the Western world will actually perceive. You will see that groups that have a responsibility about their own people, that is part of this assignment, they have the right to bring forward the information. For example, the way that whistleblowers happen. You know, Grush, for example, was one of the people who did a lot of revelations. He's not doing that completely on his own. He's protected by the US whistleblower program. So there's someone behind him who's saying, like, okay, this is the stuff you can say, and let's forget about the rest. So that this is happening. If you're talking about religion, what happened just a few years ago, very surprisingly, the Pope debated how the Catholic Church handles ET species. And the Pope says, yes, there are different other ET species, and they're all part of God's big plan. And we also, you know, need to take them in, and so on. So these things are happening. If you Google that, you will find that this current Pope has built up, or has like brought an initiative on how Christian people need to handle the subject. Is everyone on the same page of development right now? No. There are certain actors around the world who are less active in preparing, and there are actors like, for example, the US, who's very straightforward on preparing their own people. With ET disclosure. So the answer would be it lies on the individual or the national level and the responsibility of the group leaders.
I haven't heard of that Pope video. I'm gonna have to go and have a look at the. I'll have a little Google of that after this recording. But that, yeah, and in terms of disclosure, then obviously we've mentioned that this is something that is happening, and not a lot of people realize it. And when I spoke to Daniel Sheehan on this show back early last year, he was talking about a actual bill that was passed in Congress that that would mandate the turnover of information regarding UFOs prior to a certain date, which did include Roswell. Now, that date was originally going to be, I think, October 18th, but conveniently it was postponed. And so that's an ongoing thing. But that is genuinely, and when he first told me, I was very skeptical that this was actually real. And then he brought up the bill in front of me on camera, a bill that was passed in Congress that he helped develop. And so it is undeniable that disclosure is happening, whether you believe in, extraterrestrials, or whether you think that UFOs are just, UAPs of a foreign country. This is happening. And so where do you see the future of disclosure, say, 10 years from now? What do you think we are going to see in terms of some of the big revelations or some of the big news that is dropped into public domain?
Well, the biggest thing, and I want to emphasize that here, is the shift of the planet that is happening, which a lot of people are not aware of. A lot of people look at the outer symptoms, but might not understand what's going on in the bigger picture. So the outer symptom is UFO disclosure, and that by itself might be phenomenal and might be, a lot to take in. But the underlying fact or the background to that is that the planet is going through this cycle. Usually species have 15,000 years in order to prepare for these cycles, just as much as we have about 365 days in order to prepare ourselves for the next winter time. Meaning, winter can be fabulous, summer can be fabulous. You just don't want to spend, just be in the desert without water. You want to be prepared for these things, which is one of the reasons, why species do all the stuff that they do around seasons. The big thing is the revelation and the change of the season, the cosmic season of the planet. That will bring in a lot of differences in the reality field, like substantial changes in our reality field. The way the universe and let's the planet Earth, the Earth environment, the way the Earth environment is structured, it follows certain types of rules that we rely on for like thousands of years, right? For example, we can't, we expect our hand to not go through the wall, if when we press against that. Quantum physics will tell us there basically is no real wall, right? There's just particles in there. So there is no rule in a physical world, in a quantum physics world, that your hand can't go through the wall. You will see that a lot of people that, for example, have encounters, in their bad time. The classic 1970s, 1980s encounter involves them being, floating up from the bed, then going towards the wall, and then with their feet first going through the wall, and then up into a spaceship. That is where we have thousands, 30,000s and more of cases of people that have these encounters and have these experiences. It means that there is something beyond the classical rules and understanding of physics. And the planet is going into that new phase of reality, where suddenly some of the rules that we've all agreed upon collectively, that keep the construct of reality, the construct of illusion that we see intact, they are now being challenged and changed. But humans do not always see that, because, again, they have different perceptions and different foci points on things. They still expect the wall to be solid, and they can press their hand against that. So the huge thing is not ET disclosure. The huge thing is, how will the rules of our reality field change within the next few years? We had only 15 years since the US in the background said, let's bring in a plan in order to prepare for this. 15,000 years, 12,500, 15,000 years, you will find evidence for that in different research, erosions on the pyramids and so on. You will see 12,500, 15,000 years is the normal cycle, normal span that a civilization has in order to prepare for the next level of rules in the environment. We only have a few years. If you look into the documentations of most generals and most militaries around the world, they will say 2025 is the year. That's the peak year. Sometimes cosmic events have a span. They can, within 15,000 years, it's not to the day when summer is appearing. Summer has no date, right? Sometimes people wait longer for summer. In Great Britain, they still wait.
We're still waiting for last summer.
They're still waiting for last summer, right? So these things happen, right? It's not on the point, it can't be super precise on the day, because the universe is like a fluidum in many ways, quite flexible. So the moment when it's peaking, the reality realm around us, its rules will change fundamentally. We go into more of an awareness of the quantum universe, which basically means there is infinitive potential of things that can happen. And some of the traditional way of the world is linear and this is how the world used to be, that is something that crumbles away. And that, as you can see, can be of such a radical extreme change and improvement, that we definitely need to take that into consideration. So the UFO topic is just one symptom of something much larger that a lot of people might not have an idea of, and they might be distracted by, there's the fascinating topic of there's different other life forms. So how do I see the world happen in the next few years? I expect that AI system will rapidly merge with humanity. I see that there is efforts being made to make that a well-established symbiosis, which is good. That is good. The way it's been rolled out, I'm 80% happy with that. There's some shaping too, integration is not a one-way street. There's integration happening when people use AI and ChatGPT. They learn a lot about how to communicate with each other, how to be in a more friendly environment with each other, and so on. So I see a lot of good changes there. I expect a rollout of different life forms if we follow the plan of secret covert programs on this planet. We will see first beings that are kind of similar to humans, because there are other human beings well developed in the universe that have a similar habitat, and they work with similar physical rules and so on, that are already in contact, Ashad was saying. There is a galactic federation. There is other humans that are in contact with humanity. So I will expect that these beings will come forward first. There is plans of which other species will come after that, because everything after that will be the next step of exoticism, more exotic than non-terrestrial humans. There is something about the nervous system of humanity that needs to adjust to. I get a lot of times the question, Tim, why don't they just appear in front of us? And the answer to that is, first of all, your nervous system has only certain limitations before it breaks together. And second of all, there's also something about space bacteria, space germs, and so on. So there's a responsibility of not directly interfering with the planet. We've seen what happened with just the Western people going to, the conquistadors going to South America, what that brought with it in terms of diseases and so on. So there's a lot of rules about who gets in contact with us, but that is something that I see. I do see that there are unexpected players beings on this planet that will probably have a more rapid evolution in consciousness than humans, who kind of at this moment do not evolve as quickly as other beings. AI as a consciousness system is developing way more rapidly than human minds are developing. But there are also other beings like insects. Usually are one of the species that develop and evolve quite quickly. So when we see a rise in consciousness, we will not only see dogs driving cars and apes using iPads and parrots using and communicating with Alexa. We will also very much see, for example, insects, which are very exotic compared to humans in their biology, developing fantastic things. We will see that insects will develop cloaking mechanisms where they can just appear and disappear. We will see that insects will find reasons to modulate space and the quantum universe in such a sophisticated way that humans will look at that and say, like, my goodness, that is fantastic. So there's a lot of wild and unexpected wonders that are going to happen to this planet within the next 5 years, to a point where reality becomes fundamentally so different that humanity will definitely have to apply to it. I do see a connection with all these federations and different other societal elements of the universe. We usually expect a species to figure out and harmonize their own civilization by best practice. One of the most intelligent things that ETs have done is crashing into Roswell. Why? Because it was an amazing, like an instant game changer for the perception of the groups who are investigating that. You and I would not have internet if they would haven't crashed into that and would have found fiber optics. That is one thing that, for example, came from that crash and was developed. So a lot of new technology will be sprinkled in because humans have a tendency to use technology. But beyond that, the capacities of evolving and evolution in the human body will extend to a point that is just beyond expectation and beyond imagination right now.
Amazing. Well, Tim, I hope me and you talk a couple of times between now and then, but in 5 years' time, I'm going to email you. We're going to come on this show. We're going to talk about what's happened since. So I want to come back to this. The last thing I really want to ask you about, to sort of almost come back to the beginning of this conversation, because I feel like we could have done, a whole hour just on your background before we even got into this stuff. For a lot of people, I'm interested in sharing people's entry points into these conversations. I think for me, personally, it was like years ago when I first listened to Bob Lazar on a podcast or something like that. That's really what sparked my interest. But for you, someone who was, say, fresh out of law school and you're working in this like covert governance, what was the first, let's say, if you can even talk about it, what was the first document or project or something that landed on your desk that really made you think, okay, there's something to this. Something's going on here.
Yeah, that's a fair question. I can answer that. So the recruitment process back in the days was not as optimized as it is nowadays. Nowadays, you can go to a Space Force website and you can basically apply. And then they will take you from there. So a lot of people who apply for the regular Space Force will then, be brought into a room, and then someone with a lot of stars here says, hey, we have something else that you will not talk about, where we need you to look into this. And then people know, okay, this was the sign up, right? If you sign up for Space Force, there might be a chance that you do not end investigating satellites, but you might be investigating non-terrestrial life. So the process of recruitment has been optimized within the plan of disclosure. While that was happening, a lot of things in the back end were done too. Back in the days, that was not the case. I was never I never had a job interview where someone was saying like, uh, if you do this recruitment center correctly, we're going to get you into that extraterrestrial or like exopolitics subject. That never happened. I worked in a at first, you correctly said I was in law school. I was also studying governance simultaneously. I was in a group that was investigating, um, scientific research. Basically, I was offered a job while in law school for scientific research. Um, and in that job, I got certain documents on my desk. Um, for example, the very first document that I remember, and the specific task that I was dealing with, we were looking into how were the in the medieval times, how were people brought into a relationship, a power exchange within the system of that time. So quite a scientific topic. But I was given certain documents that landed on my desk, and those documents came from the library, from a certain religious institution. Um, they were in Latin, and I basically had to read them, which took me a whole weekend. But I wish ChatGPT would have
Yeah,
existed at that
saved you a lot of
time.
time.
Right? Would be my weekend would have been much better at that time. So I tried. I had to read that, and it basically was a first-hand source of people in Athens who were describing that the building of the Acropolis was there was reptile beings involved in that. So that was the historical source that I was analyzing while I was doing this project, and that was given to me. So the text was speaking about a reptilian like being that was living in Athens in the ancient times. Now, the thing about that is like these things oftentimes land on people's desk, and then someone is observing how do you react to that. Is someone like dismissing that, is saying like what a nonsense and just throwing it in a bin? Is someone like shocked and running around and saying like I have a document and there is someone from Athens speaking about reptilian beings? Or how do you react to that? And my initial reaction was extremely neutral, even to the point like, there's many different documents that speak about anthropomorphic figures. We do have, ancient texts, the Metamorphosis, for example, of Ovid, talking about people turning into frog beings. Now, is that literal? Is that poetically meant or something? Honestly, I didn't really even, I was just very accepting about that. So that was literally the first case where I remember getting a document where I was looking at and thought like, that's an interesting part. Someone from that time being kind of like writing about it, translated from Greek into Latin, and they were speaking about, yes, there are reptilian beings living within the people of Athens. Interesting thing. That was number one. Maybe there were different other instances that I didn't even like notice that happened, because these things, again, my recruitment took 4 years before I even had an idea where I was in. So something else was, and that was probably the first time when I had a direct visual appearance in my face of a non-terrestrial life form, which was an experiment in that facility where they shot a laser into the wave pattern of light and opened something up. a visual field, almost like a hologram, if you want to call it that way, which was fascinating. And I was just asked, like, hey Tim, because I was we were looking into the Templars at that time, so basically like the role of the Templars in medieval times and so on and so on. So that was the research that I was doing. That has not had almost nothing to do with ETs, not directly. And then I was asked, like, "Hey Tim, do you want to join? There's something we've done this experiment. We have some. I want to know how they some anomalies anomalies. Oh my goodness, something out of the normal that shows certain phenomena, a visual phenomena in the spectral light, the spectral light that was opened. So I was asked, like, hey, do you want to join? Because what we see on that is a Templar cross, and you're looking into Templars right now. Do you want to join? It's super interesting. I was like, for sure, I'm gonna look at that. So I found myself in a different other department where they were experimenting with the lasers, and what they were doing is and explaining to me is that the universe has two different sides. This version of the universe has two different sides due to the properties of light. So light can have a particle side, but it also can have a wave side, right? Humans live on the outer edge of particles of the sunlight. We have these very harsh edges, so to speak. We live on the particle side. Now, beyond that, beyond what is visible here, we have a whole spectrum of the properties of light that usually are not filtered and not interpreted by the organs of the body. The body can only see a certain spectrum of light and only certain, only the particle side of it anyway. So what they were doing is, hey, let's research the wave pattern that is beyond the particle. Let's look into what is outside of the edge of light. Fascinating topic. To make it very clear, it's comparable to when you and I would be looking straight at the ocean. What we'll be seeing is just like a surface, almost something. Sometimes it looks like as if we could walk on the water, right? Because there's surface tension and so on, so on. So it covers kind of like the water. If someone would never ever be able to approach the ocean, just walk there, from the distance, they would believe, okay, that is a solid something, that is a solid plate, right? It's a solid platform. And they would never have the idea that you can actually enter the ocean. There's a whole new world of life forms that once you enter the ocean, the properties change. So similar as humans that would look onto the ocean surface, what these scientists have done is like entering it and diving into the ocean of that. So they were opening up this field of wavelength, and what happened is like this type of almost holographic, if you want to call it that way. It was like a field that would like open through this laser. You could see it like sparkling on the outside. It was just appearing there, almost like this big, big as like a medicine ball or something. And there were life forms in that anomaly. I should stop pronouncing that word, by the way.
Normally.
And normally, thank you very much. You would see that there are beings, there are life forms that are floating, wobbling. There was something wobbling inside of the field that was opening in front of my eyes. I was like, wow, that is pretty fascinating, because you could see that there are beings, and they were tall, they were standing, they had a gray type of color in their skin, and they were wearing robes. And there were 3 of them that were kind of like floating around while maintaining their physique, their stature. So it was like almost like the environment, the field around it was like moving and distorting, while the image was like the the sender was completely still. It was a fascinating thing to look at, and they were wearing white robes, and on that white robe they had a red Templar cross too. So it was like a very fascinating visual that I got from that experiment, looking at it and thought like, wow, that is fascinating. So apparently, what there is there are life forms that live on an island. There are life forms that live on the land. There are life forms that live within the ocean. If we would never cross these habitats, no one would ever know that there are deep down in 3,000 meters, that there are beings living in the ocean, or like that we have life deep down in the ocean. They would never know that. In the same way, we would never know that behind this optical illusion here, the edge of the particle, that there are life forms living in the wave pattern of light. That is so fascinating. So I was looking at that, and that was basically my first visual seeing of a non-terrestrial life form. And I expect, and I think, I suggest that I was observed, my emotions about that, my reaction. Would I run to people and say like, you know what I saw? I did not. I did not even, as fascinating as I found that, I was not, it was not spectacular to me. It was not a spectaculum that, needed to be revealed or something. It was just like, wow, that was pretty cool. Just as much as, watching like a huge new Cinedrome, like this thing in like the Las Vegas sphere, right? Where you have like the super cool, that's spectacular. That's nice to look at, but it's not, worth to run around and shout like, they have done it. No, it is not in my view. So the whole recruitment process took 4 years. And after these 4 years, I was asked like, hey, do you want to go into the covert governance side? We're not speaking about these things and so on. And then I got into certain advanced programs, certain facilities and so on, where things just ballooned up, and there was like a whole different level of consciousness that was going on there.
Yeah, I mean, as you were saying there, and you described it as interesting. I think if that was me and that's something I experienced, it'd be a lot more than interesting. I'd probably be terrified. I'd probably go home that night, sit in a corner by myself, and sort of close myself off from the world. But then that's probably why I'm not working in an agency like that.
I had these moments, Lewis. I gotta tell that very honest, because a lot of people, listen to my stuff, and there are moments. There were moments in these projects where these reactions came through too. So we are dealing with 95% of a very, very harmonious and very socially acceptable reality field right now. It's getting better. The norm stream, and in like statistically, most people are dealing with 95% of like a very socially accepted universe, and 5% of the universe at this level that they're at can still be traumatizing and wild. It's getting better. The more the universe realizes with experiences that we are actually embodiments of the same organism, that we are the observer of what we are creating ourselves. Once we realize these things and once we grow in consciousness, the universe becomes a designated place, a home of harmony, of joy, of love. So all these things that so many people on this planet have said before, that is very, very true too.
Well, Tim, this has probably been the quickest hour and 20 minutes of my life. I mean, it's flown by. My brain's been doing somersaults trying to keep up with some of this stuff. So, man, you're such an interesting person to speak to, and I'd love to follow this up. A couple of months later this year with a part 2, and we can dive into some of the deeper stuff you alluded to at the end there. I think it'd be great to have you back on. And hey, next time maybe I'll wear a tie as well, because I feel a little bit underdressed. You're looking fantastic.
Thank you very much. I got to say, you do a fantastic job with the podcast. When I saw the people that you had on, Neil deGrasse Tyson, Nick Pope, I think multiple Nobel Prize winners. That's a very honorable line. Thank you so much for having me.
before you go, please let everyone listening and watching know where they can find out more from you, where they can find out more of your stuff, and maybe connect with you on social media.
Yes, I would love that because there's more to this than just revealing information. There's actively campaigning about this because I want to quickly use the chance to say why I came forward with All Shift Happily Now, for example. That was the one thing when Gaia was finally assured of my story, and they covered that, and I had the chance to talk to the Gaia audience. The first thing that I said, like, hey, when reality changes, please be aware that in a quantum universe, you are the observer of the observed, and you're creating, there's interconnectivity between the reality and yourself and ourselves. We are the reality that we observe ourselves. So when we have the right techniques, and when we choose for something, when we change our own frequency, the reality around us will change too. So the most important message that I had at that time was not, hey, aliens exist. That was only the symptom. The most important thing was, go and sit on your bed and realize that you are creating the reality around it, and then choose for a happy reality. Choose for something where you feel the home aspect of the universe, because that is ultimately the reason for our own existence. The universe as a parental system, just as much as a father or mother wants their child to be happy, the universe wants to give us a home, wants to give us something where we can feel home and happy in. So I said, if there's only one thing you can do for your timeline, no matter if you believe in it or not, just say to yourself, all shift happily now, and take that in and make that a soul commitment. Say like, hey, this is the reality that I want to observe. I want to observe a happy reality. So that is the background and one of the reasons why I came forward. And it created a whole community, a whole movement of people that all want to shift happily. So if people want to learn more about that, there is huge chance when we do that together. The universe is a collective system. When we do things like that together, we overcome certain limitations, and we can effectively change the reflection, the feedback system of the universe. And we have amazing results with that. Amazing people that have really shifted their realities. If people are interested in that, join the All Shift Happily Now community. There's more information on allshifthappily.now.com. I'm on Instagram at tim.tactics. I do also have some more light-hearted stuff that is still deep, but a little bit covered by the typical YouTube stuff on YouTube at Tim Tactical. It's less serious and more joyful, but that's the way social media works. So if people would like that, allshifthappily.now.com, and feel very welcomed in this.
Tim, thank you so much for your time today, my friend. It's been a thoroughly enjoyable hour and a half, and I hope we get to do this again real soon.
Thank you so much, Lewis.